Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the latest episode of the Dubcast, part of the Roundball Australia podcast network. And today we're breaking down the Matildas' 22-player squad for their upcoming FIFA Series games against Malawi and the winner of Kenya versus India, taking place in Kenya during the April international window. My name is Poletti. Joining me today is Christian Montegan. And Christian, a lot of familiar names in this squad just off the back of the Women's Asian Cup, when I think a lot of people, myself included, flagged maybe a bit more rotation than what we've got.
Yeah, 100%. I definitely expected a few more players to maybe not even get their debuts, but just players who have maybe got maybe a few caps under their belts to get themselves into the environment a bit more. And you are right, there are a lot of familiar faces in there. I believe there's 19 players from the Asian Cup squad that have been brought into this FIFA Series squad, so it's quite a lot. I don't know whether Montemurro, I think obviously they're thinking behind it for Montemurro is he wants to obviously keep that cohesion, keep that chemistry, keep a tight-knit group together. Obviously the World Cup is just around the corner, right? It's only next year, so just over a year to go. So I think he will experiment a bit more. But yeah, I was surprised as you, Poletti, that there weren't, more players, more unfamiliar faces that perhaps deserved a bit more of an opportunity.
Now, you weren't in the press conference that Joe Montemurro did, but you may as well have been, because you just flagged what the biggest talking point was out of it, is that he flagged that continuity from a tactical standpoint, working on that cohesion amongst the squad, as well as, working on specific player combinations and the like to, keep that going as the players develop. Well, seeing some of those other players, and he flagged that there'd be a lot of minutes, or maybe not a lot of minutes, but he flagged that there would be minutes available for those who didn't play a lot during the Asian Cup. And so if you look at this squad, the likes of an Alex Chidiac, the likes of a Jamila Rankin, who didn't get a whole ton of game time during the Women's Asian Cup. I'll run you through the squad, which will also be appearing on your screen if you're watching on YouTube. So we'll go in alphabetical order. Morgan Aquino, Mackenzie Arnold, Steph Catley, Alex Chidiac, Caitlin Ford, Isabel Gomez, Winona Heatley, Alana Kennedy, Sam Kerr, Chloe Lincoln, Letitia McKenna, Holly McNamara, Jessica Nash makes her way back into the squad. Courtney Nevin, Jamila Rankin, Hayley Razo, Charlie Rule, Amy Sayer, Remy Simpson, Caitlin Torpy, Emily Van Egmond, and Claire Wheeler. We'll start with Steph Catley. So, as we saw at the time of recording, at least, that in this morning's Champions League game, Steph Catley did leave the field with what appeared to be, hamstring tightness of some description. Joe Montemurro was asked about it. He said that, that he was under the impression that Catley said that it was just a little bit of tightness, that she took herself off. It doesn't expect there'll be any issues, but or any sort of great, injury of a great extent, but that they'll use precautions accordingly. And at this point, it's just waiting for scans. This is one of those things that happens, it seemingly happens at least every time that in and around one squad call-up, there always seems to be an injury, right?
Yeah, and I think if I was Montemurro, I wouldn't even take the risk, even if the test results come back as, it's all clear that there's no real serious injury. It's like, for me, does she really have to play? Does she have to play in this FIFA series? Probably not. We know what Catley can do. She's obviously a very experienced player. I understand that Montemurro mentioned about the continuity and the cohesion, and I understand she's obviously a big leader of the side, but I don't know. I just don't think she really has to play. Like, why take that risk, right? When you can experiment with a couple of other different players, in that fullback role. I just don't think it's not, the worst case scenario. So for me, I'd probably just leave her out of the squad altogether, if she's fit or not, to be perfectly honest. And I don't know, maybe Montemurro probably wants her in the camp for that sort of leadership for the new girls coming in as well. You obviously got Sam Kerr there too, Caitlin Ford, etc. Van Egmond. There's just so many experienced names in there. It's like, for me, I just wouldn't take her.
Yeah, I think that's a fair take to have. Look, it's just kind of a wait and see now at this point as to to what happens next, I want to talk about some of the players that are missing from this squad selection. So you look at the likes of an Ellie Carpenter, you look at the likes of a Mary Fowler, Katrina Gorry. In terms of like, I guess, the big name players, right? A lot of the fan favorites, and Joe Montemurro said that it's quite a bit of load management going on as well. So you look at, Ellie Carpenter's been playing week in, week out in the WSL. Sam Kerr sort of been making her way back from injury and sort of getting towards that 90-minute fitness again. Mary Fowler, he flagged as sort of like it's very much part of a strategic return in terms of trying to get her back to full 90 fitness. We've got to remember she came into the Asian Cup off basically no minutes because of that ACL injury that she played. So I very much, like that he's acknowledged, the need for load management and for rest. Like I said, I just think I would have maybe liked something more like a 60-40 sort of split with the newer players and the veteran senior players, as opposed to, like we touched on, that 19 of 22 that were at the Asian Cup, a lot of whom have a significant number of caps at this stage in their career as well.
Yeah, and obviously he's going to have a lot more international windows to work with between now and the World Cup next year. So he does have a bit of time on his side, but I just worry in a sense that, yes, I think there needs to be a transition phase. I think he mentioned that post-Asian Cup final that obviously he's going to have to, embed a few of these, younger faces, the youth into the system, because obviously you've got some of the older girls are going to be departing pretty soon. Probably the World Cup is going to be, their last real major tournament together. It's just about that fine balance, isn't it? And, looking at this squad now with those 19 players from the Asian Cup into here, for me, it's like, okay, well, it was a great opportunity to bring some new faces in. That now that he really hasn't done that, it's like, I don't know, maybe is he a bit afraid to do so before the World Cup? And I think it goes back to his point of just keeping the squad together. He doesn't want too much change. And that's, to be fair, it's fair enough, because it's very difficult. Like I said before, like there's going to be, a few more international windows before the World Cup, but you're not playing week in, week out. You're not getting a camp every single week. So in order to work with the squad, that you got, you can't really chop and change too much. And that's where I have a bit of sympathy there for Montemurro. But on the flip side, like you, Poletti, I would have liked to see a few more new faces, because we know what we're going to get from those experienced players, right? So that's sort of personally what I would have probably preferred.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Look, there's a fine line here, right, between, wanting to, rest and rotate players. And Joe flagged several times throughout the press conference that he's only been in the role for 10 months, right? And that comes back to, the way that whole situation was handled, which I'm not going to touch on today. We're just going to stay as focused as we can on the squad itself here, as well as, taking these games seriously in terms of where they stand in the development, right? And I mean, you look at the extended or provisional squad that, Malawi have named, right? You've got the Chawinga sisters there. You've got Rose Kabzere, who, plays for Montpellier. You've got Faith Chimzamu, who plays for Häcken in Sweden, right? Like there's some serious talent in this squad, and you can't exactly not take that seriously. Despite where they sit in the world rankings, sort of someone in the YouTube comments last week, who's sort of like, the way that the ranking systems work, right, is it's very easy to manipulate the rankings, for some of these, for some of the top nations, so they essentially keep their spot, right, which means they can get better seeding and the like. Whereas, I went over this with, I'm pretty sure it was Burke I went over this with, right? Like, they haven't had, like, they've played, what was it? I think it was, they played 6 friendlies. They had WAFCON qualifying, and then, a 3 nations tournament, as well as, some games during the February window, but, not really. They haven't had a ton of, competitive football, and we know that friendlies are ranked lower than than competitive fixtures, right? So it's really about finding the balance of making sure that you can get exactly what you need out of these windows while trying to rest and rotate, right?
Yeah, for sure, 100% agree. You don't, you definitely don't have to take these games lightly or for granted. But the results aren't really the key focus, or they shouldn't be for Montemurro, right? It's about the football that they play, trying to keep that consistency flowing. Because you saw in the final against Japan, you can see there's actually an identity with this Matilda side, right? You actually know what you're going to get. Whereas I think from the previous era with Gustafsson, I think that was sort of lost a bit. So I think Montemurro's definitely got this side on the right track. You can tell, the attacking intent, the intensity, it's all there, right? I think they were very unlucky against Japan in that final, and it probably could have gone either way. Just that bit of extra quality for Japan really did it in the end. But, again, they're on the right path. It's just, like you said, it's that fine balance, right? When do you start to incorporate, these new faces? When do you start to, drop a couple of these veterans and these players who have been there, for 15, 20 years, right? It's very difficult to balance. And that's the tough job that Montemurro has at the moment, because once the World Cup arrives next year, he's got to be very sure about not only his starting 11, but, the whole squad that, in terms of depth, you get injuries, players out of form, etc. Like, so many things can happen between now and then. He just has to be prepared for every single scenario, and that's why, again, I would have loved to have seen maybe a few more experimentations within this FIFA series. That's not to say that he won't get more chances in the future, but I think he really has to start now, and start making those few tweaks and adjustments, moving forward.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll get to see some more of that. I wanna look at some of the inclusions now. So, Letitia McKenna will be making her squad debut. Izzy Gomez comes back into the fold, as does Jessica Nash, who's playing in Italy at the moment for Sassuolo. You've got Izzy Gomez at the Central Coast Mariners, which is always. Plenty. We know enough about Izzy Gomez, right? She's that modern midfielder. She's very good at breaking lines. She's very comfortable on the ball. And Joe Montemurro had similar things to say about Letitia McKenna and her first call up. In terms of that, like, he'd been watching her for very closely for the last 6 or so months, which is. Given that she's been playing for Melbourne City, I can go through the Round Ball Australia photo drive right now, and I could probably find 6 photos of Montemurro at a Melbourne City game. So he's definitely been keeping an eye on her as one for the future. I guess this is a bandwagon that Burke has been on for a while, amongst plenty of other people. Burke's not here at the moment, but yeah, she wanted it to be known that she was right with Letitia McKenna and the fact that she's been on this for a very long time. So shout out to Burke. You were right as Letitia McKenna getting that call up. I know you don't watch the dub as closely as myself and Burke do, as well as a couple of others, Christian. But I guess Letitia McKenna, she's one of those names that stands out, right?
Yeah, for sure. I've heard her name, a few times this season, pop up in terms of her potential talent. I mean, she's 23 years old. Obviously still has a lot of time on her side to develop and grow. And Montemurro, he's not scared to bring those players in, right? It's just about how much game time she'll get in this FIFA series. I hope it's a bit, just to see, how she, works in that, national team environment, what she's capable of, because it's a different type of pressure, right? Playing for your national team compared to, your club team like Melbourne City, right? So I think it just, it's a big opportunity for her. To see, in these next friendlies, to see, what she's got, right. How can she gel, with the teammates, the likes of Sam Kerr, Caitlin Ford, or whoever's, playing in and amongst around her. It'll be really interesting to see, what she can deliver, obviously in midfield. But, the other names, you obviously got Alana Kennedy in their experience, like we said before, Sam Kerr, Caitlin Ford, Izzy Gomez as well, from the Mariners. She only has, I believe, 1 cap for the Matildas. So yeah, these you've got sort of a mix of sort of the old and new. Even though we both said before that we'd have liked to see a bit more rotation, I think it's probably enough in Montemurro's mind to suggest that okay, this is enough for me to work with, so that there's not too much imbalance, if that makes sense. Because we go back to previous Matildas friendlies, for example, I think when the Matildas lost 7-0 to Spain, or there's been some really bad drubbings, and there was a lot of criticism aimed at, I think back then it was Gustafsson, that why are you experimenting so much with the team? And I think Montemurro has probably leaned towards the other side of the bracket in that sense. So I think he's very careful and cautious in that respect, which is fair enough again. But let's see how this team can really gel and perform. And again, it's still 19 players in the Asian Cup squad, right? So like these players don't know how to play together. So that's why I'm expecting quite a bit in this FIFA series.
Yep, absolutely. The last thing that I wanted to touch on before we wrap up for today is another absence that was flagged during the press conference as well by Teo Pellizzeri, is the absence of Daniela Garlic, who has come through the A-League's system. Was at Melbourne City, racked up 39 appearances, went to left the club, went to the Eredivisie to sign with FC Twente. Has since moved to Vizio in Sweden, which look, good move. Sweden definitely a good league. Certainly not criticizing the move itself. But Joe flagged that she was that he and the coaching staff wanted her to play the under-20s Asian Cup, which is going on at the moment. By the time you listen to this, the young Matildas will have probably played their first game already, as I don't imagine I'm getting this up, tonight. So they'll have played their first game already at the under-20 Asian Cup. But because it's outside of a FIFA window, clubs don't have to release players, and Galich sort of indicated that she thought it might be best for her to stay with her club side, at Vizio. So I don't know. It's interesting because she's had a handful of senior call-ups already. She's, one of these. She's one of these players who, was identified a while ago as sort of, maybe being the next big thing, right? And yet. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. Like I'm not certainly saying that she turned down a call up by any stretch, but I don't know. She's sort of been in and out. Like and she kind of started to get a little bit of rhythm going for a little bit, and then it's just kind of not been in and around the national team squad. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I remember interviewing her, I think 2 or 3 years ago. You could tell she was, very mature, very level-headed, for such a young age. Back then, she was about, 2021. She's got, obviously a lot of talent, right? You see, obviously at Melbourne City with her time there, the way she, grew and developed, you could tell that she was able to, really thrive in that system at Melbourne City, right? That real attacking intent, creativity. She literally had everything. That's why, like you said before, everyone sort of touted her as this next big thing to really, embed herself into this Matilda squad at a very early age. But it's hard to break through in this team, right? Like we said before, there's so much experience, and for a coach, it's hard to, maybe perhaps, bring a couple of those sorts of young talents on. They prefer them to develop in the under 20s, or the under 17s, whatever the case may be, to try and develop their game a bit more. And sort of gives me Iran Kunda vibes from the Socceroos, where in his early days we said, oh, Iran Kunda is this massive talent. Why is he in the Socceroos? And he was sort of in and out of the squad, and all fans were sort of frustrated as to why he wasn't consistently in the squads. I think Galich is probably, to an extent, probably in the same boat, in the sense that she probably has been ripped off a couple of call-ups that she probably deserved, but it's up to her to sort of try and knock on the door and sort of tell Montemurro that, hey, I'm here. I'm more than capable of producing, for the Matildas. But it's about her club form as well. Has to obviously be playing consistent minutes and performing at the highest level, and that's what Montemurro is looking for, not just from her but from the whole squad. It's based on merit at the end of the day, right? So I think she's definitely got the talent to do it. It's just about whether she can, and whether the moves to Sweden is the right one. I guess we'll tell by next year when the World Cup rolls around. So I hope she makes it, because she is a real talent. I enjoyed watching her a few games when she was here in Australia in the dub. So yeah, let's just wait and see.
Yeah, she's only just started her season at Vizio, so it's maybe it's just a case of wanting to keep that continuity with the team. We sort of it's one of those situations where sometimes you get players coming in and out. We know teams train during international windows and sort of as Montemurro touched on, work on that continuity, work on that cohesion and combinations. I know I said that was the last thing I wanted to touch on, but there was one more thing. I had a chance to ask Joe about the future of the under-23s program, because he mentioned, as we've touched on, that continuity, that cohesion, that combinations, that player development, and we know how big the gap is between the under-20s and the senior side, but also the under-17s and the under-20s side, and whether continuing that under-23s program, which was flagged by Tony Gustafsson during his time, would be beneficial to player development. And this is what Joe had to say.
The identified gaps that is one of them. I think also the identified gap is the 17s into the 20s, because a lot of players, probably not because of an age and I think that choices of A-League clubs, they probably don't get an A-League contract at 16, 17 coming out of that, and that's a big. I think a massive jump to be playing, whether it's not playing as much and not being involved as much, and then pretending to go into an under-20s Asian Cup or being selected for the under-20s. So that's one gap that I've identified. The under-23s is a big one. I go back to Europe, obviously, because I worked there for the last 9 years, and all national teams, when they do go into a FIFA window, bring an under-23 team with them, playing separate games and so on. So that's a big one, and I think we have to be even a little bit unique with the way we do it. I honestly think we should even be bringing in local camps and probably even a bigger cohort of 23 players. Maybe, obviously our geographic issue is always one that we need to. That's a challenge. So whether we split the nation in half and have two hubs where we're bringing in two groups of under 20s and under 23s while we're in camp, and we can work at whether we play, some local Asian teams. We have had some discussions about, having 4 nation tournaments and so on and so on. So they are things that I flagged pretty early on when I got the job. Looking at the pillar, that we do need to do some more work with the under 23s. They need to be exposed to more football, in terms of even in Asia. Understanding what it takes to go to a difficult nation and, in front of parochial crowds and getting results. That's all part of that football journey. So they're things we can do, and they're things that I know that we are looking at, in a very, very detailed way, because you're right. We just got to get these groups together more. They need to be exposed more to football, and obviously make sure that those gaps are filled, so that we give ourselves a good opportunity to be playing more football.
Christian, we just heard Joe talking there. What were your big takeaways from that?
I think it was important what he said, right? He obviously agreed with, what you said, Poletti, when, you asked him the question about, should the Matildas be looking at sort of that under-23 program to close the gap, and he definitely agrees. But I think what my biggest takeaway was from his comments was that everyone has to be on the same page, right, in terms of that development, the investment into the game, because it's important, right? If you have too much of a big gap between, say, under 17s, under 20s, and you're making that big leap into the senior side, we just spoke about Galich before. Sometimes it can be a stretch too far to try and, consistently, do well with the senior team. You need that extra sort of development and growth before you actually reach that stage. And I think it would be a very important path to take. Whether it happens, it's sort of, a wait and see. But I'd love to see, Football Australia sit down, not only with Montemurro, but, other staff and, the board to see, what are the potential options and opportunities, because, you see other countries around the world doing it. Why can't the Matildas? We've already fallen behind, the rest of the world in a couple of different areas. And that's sort of why we have lagged behind, the likes of, these top European nations who are, performing well at the World Cups now. We have to try and find different solutions, different ways to try and catch up to the likes of Spain's, the Germany's, etc., England's. So, I think Montemurro would definitely be hoping to see sort of change in that, because he's big on youth development. He's worked with a lot of youngsters before throughout his coaching career, and he understands the importance, especially now with the Matildas, with this aging squad, with a lot of players departing, in the foreseeable future, 1-2 years. He knows that this is vitally important for the next phase of the Matildas moving forward. So, I hope it happens, because I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I want to see it happen. I think when you look at, the way that the under-23s performed in Vietnam at the Asian Cup, where Letitia McKenna was one of those standout players at that tournament, we saw, as I said, we saw Gustafsson really push for that program to come in, because, as Joe flagged, it's what they do in Europe, right? The United States has a good under-23s program as well. And I understand there's a world of limited and finite resources that you've got to work in, but ultimately, surely, it's about making sure that, you set the players up for success. And having an under-23s program would certainly do that, in my opinion, at least. And so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But that will do for this episode of the Dubcast, part of the Round Ball Australia podcast network. Christian, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Poletti.
And thank you all for tuning in. If you aren't already, hit that follow button, hit that subscribe button. It's the easiest way to help support the channel as we continue our growth. I flagged this a few times already, 1,000 subscribers, and we, are eligible to apply for the YouTube monetization program, which will help to continue to bring amazing content like this as well as some other projects that are in the works. The first of which I'm hoping to drop early next week, so keep an eye on the socials for that, as well as here the YouTube channel. That one won't be appearing as a podcast. It'll just be specifically on the YouTube channel, as it is a video project. So I'm very much, looking forward to bringing that to you. But that will do it for now. We'll be back next week as well with our normal podcast to recap the final round of the A-League women, as well as look a little bit more closely at Malawi as we head towards the Matildas FIFA series games. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week.